Okay, so in this podcast episode, I want to talk about a particular subset of women, and that is smaller women. Women who are like 5 foot to 5'3", a small frame. And I want to talk about the specific challenges that you face with fat loss and why you might be finding it really hard to lose weight. So I don't want to put people in boxes, but over the years of coaching hundreds of women when it comes to building strength and losing fat, certain patterns do start to emerge. And there are these kind of certain archetypes of clients that I come across. And most people kind of fit a certain kind of client type, and they have a similar sort of constellation of obstacles and difficulties when it comes to fat loss. And I think it can be really, really, really helpful to understand what your particular personal set of difficulties are, but also where you might have some advantages, and just what you as an individual are likely to struggle with, because it varies so much from person to person and from group to group. So when I start working with someone, I always try to just highlight, the particular obstacles that they may face and the kind of particular group that they fit into. Obviously, lots of more personal stuff emerges, and everyone's different. But there are some sort of collective problems that we bump into. So a client type that I often get is that smaller woman, like that petite woman of, say, like 5 foot, 5'3". I've had women who are like 4'10", 4'11" as well. So you're super duper tiny, often a small frame, and often quite inactive, or not having much muscle mass. Obviously, there are some small women who are very active, so this doesn't all apply to them. But if you are in that group of a very small frame, 5 foot to 5'3", it is unlikely that your maintenance calories are going to be higher than about 1,700, 1,800 calories per day. And sometimes they can be as low as 1,600, right? And that's just for maintenance calories. That's just how many calories you need to maintain your weight. So, some women that I work with are actually losing body fat on that kind of number, like 1,600 to 1,800 calories. So you're starting from, just to maintain your weight, you need to eat somewhere between 1,600 to 1,800 calories a day. Now, this varies quite a lot, again, depending on how active you are. So, a woman who's doing, a 5 foot tall woman who's doing 3,000 steps a day versus someone who's doing 12,000 steps a day, your calorie target's going to be very, very different. Your maintenance calories are going to be very, very different. Somebody who's doing strength training 3 times a week, as opposed to somebody who's not doing any exercise, your maintenance calories are going to be very different. But it's also true that the bigger you are, so, if I weigh 80 kilos and I'm like, almost 6 foot tall, per unit of exercise, so every minute that I spend exercising, or every step that I take, every 1,000 steps that I take, the calorie burn is quite high because there's so much of me, right? If you are compared to somebody who is just like weighs 50 kilos, you're going to burn far more calories every 1,000 steps, or so bigger women, the bigger you are, the more bang for your buck you get from movement and from exercise in terms of calorie burn. And I'm going to address this in a separate podcast where I talk about larger women. But when you are just 5 foot tall and you only weigh 55 kilos, you get a smaller bang for your buck for exercise. It doesn't mean that it's not significant for you, but you might only be burning 300 calories in an hour's workout, whereas a bigger woman might be burning 500 calories in an hour's workout. So you just don't get as much bang for your buck. It doesn't add as many calories onto your day when you're more active. So just the main problem that you face as a smaller woman is that you just don't have a very high calorie burn. Even if you're quite active, it's very, very, very rarely over 1,800 or 1,900. You rarely get up to 2,000 calories just as maintenance calories. So your basic needs for calorie intake are much lower than the average population. And this is really tricky because you don't live in a vacuum and you don't live with a bunch of other people who are only 5 foot tall. You live with a bunch of other people, your husband who's probably much taller than you, friends who might be much bigger than you. And so their calorie needs are higher. So you live in a world where, we live in a very obesogenic environment. And you live also amongst other people who all have higher calorie needs than you and so need to eat more food than you. And we all compare ourselves. It's impossible to not compare yourself to other people. And so you constantly have that comparison of like seeing what's on other people's plates and seeing what other people should and need to eat. And so you're likely to always sort of gravitate up and eat slightly more than what you need, because you're comparing to people who have a much higher maintenance calories to you. So just to give you an extreme-ish example, I once had a client who was about 5'3" and her husband was 6 foot tall. She weighed, under 60 kilos and he weighed like 85 kilos. So he was like an entire quarter bigger than her. He was like 25% more of him than there is of her. And remember, there's not all fat mass, right? That's all, most of that is active tissue. It's metabolically active tissue, like muscle mass, bone density, connective tissue. And it's going to be more fat as well. But his organs are bigger, like everything about him is bigger, and so requires more energy just to keep the lights on. And then every bit of exercise that he does, or every bit of movement he does, he also burns more calories than she does by comparison, because there's much more to sustain. But yet she was still having similar sized meals to him. She was sitting down in the evening and eating the same sort of portion size. Now, if that dinner is, say, 800 calories, for him, that's going to be a very reasonable calorie. There's going to be a very reasonable amount of food for his dinner. Remember, this is probably somebody, a 6 foot tall, like largish guy. He's going to be burning well over 2,000 calories. His maintenance calories are probably going to be around 2,400, or maybe a bit higher, but around that sort of amount. So the difference between what she needs, again, maintenance calories, 1,700, 1,800, whereas his maintenance calories are much, much higher, 2,400 plus. Yet she's still sitting down to have the same 800 calorie dinner. Now that's a big, big, big chunk of her maintenance calories. That leaves her just 1,000 calories less left for the rest of the day, for her other meals in the day. Whereas for him, it leaves him quite a bit more calories left, like over 1,500 for the rest of his day. And it's just a really kind of inconvenient truth that she just needs a much, much, much smaller dinner than he does. That she would need, if he's like a quarter of the size of her again, if he's eating an 800 calorie meal, she would need, say, a 600 calorie meal in order for it to be equivalent in terms of their overall caloric needs. So, that's just one sign. If your meal sizes are the same as your husband and he's significantly bigger than you and weighs significantly more, that's one sign that you're going to be eating way too much for your calorie needs. And likewise, if you are eating a similar amount of food to women around you who are much bigger, who are taller than you, who have a bigger frame than you, who are heavier than you, I'm 5'6" and at my lightest, I weigh like 63 kilos. I might be 10 kilos heavier than you are. So there's quite a bit more of me and my calorie needs will be quite a bit higher than yours. So if you're eating similar amounts to women who are much bigger than you, that also might be a clue that as to why you're struggling to lose weight. One other factor to add into that is that even if a man and a woman weigh the same amount, so if you've got a man and a woman, husband and wife, they both weigh 70 kilos. The man is like, if they are similar levels of body fatness, the man is going to have about 10% less body fat than the woman. So if he's 20% body fat, she will likely be 30% body fat. What that means in practice is that he will have more muscle mass, even at the same weight as, and the same height as, and the same frame as a woman. He is going to have more muscle mass than she does. Now, obviously, there are exceptions to this rule, but if you take population averages, this is how it works out. So even a man and a woman who weigh the same, he is still going to have a higher calorie maintenance calories than she is, a higher daily calorie expenditure than she is, because of that extra muscle mass that she doesn't have. Okay, so when you add those factors together, you've got a guy who's taller than you, who's bigger than you, who weighs 10, 20, 30 kilos more than you do. And also he's a lower body fat percentage than you are and has more muscle mass per unit or per kilo of total body weight. He is going to have a much, much, much higher metabolism than you do. This may all seem monumentally unfair, but the reality is that you also have a much, much lower appetite than he does, or than women who are bigger than you do. Because your caloric needs, your needs for, your pure need for energy, your need for protein, your need for micronutrients is all going to be smaller than what somebody who's bigger than you needs. So it is actually fair in a purely biological from a purely biological standpoint. But when you don't live in a vacuum, you're comparing yourself to other people, you're eating with other people, it can feel really, really, really unfair. And also foods don't come in, often with a meal, you can make sure that you're having, 3/4 what your husband's having or whatever. But foods don't usually come like that. So if you go to a shop, you won't be able to buy a sandwich that's 3/4 of the size of the sandwich someone else buys. You'll buy the same size sandwich, the same 500 to 600 calorie sandwich, or you'll go and buy the same 300 calorie donut. But that is a bigger proportion of your daily calorie expenditure than for the bigger person. So it's a bigger dent into your calories than it is for somebody who's bigger than you. Another reason why I think it's really hard for smaller women to lose weight is because we also have this very popular narrative on social media right now that a lot of sort of fitness professionals love to say, don't do a 1,200 calorie diet. Don't cut your calories that low. It's not good for you. It's too low. It's a starvation diet, blah, blah, blah. This is absolutely true, and I absolutely support this message for the average woman. But this is really unhelpful if you are a smaller woman, because this is the inconvenient truth that a lot of people sort of get angry about. But if you are a smaller woman, if you are around 5 foot tall, you may need to eat 1,200 calories or less in order to be able to lose weight. So some of my smaller clients will be eating between 1,000 and 1,200 calories per day, especially if they're inactive, especially if they don't do any muscle building activity. And they won't be hungry on this amount, okay? So you've got to remember that when we talk about these sorts of things, we're talking about population averages. So if we take me as an example, I'm quite an average height woman. I'm 5'6", and I weigh at my lightest 63 kilos, around that amount. That's very, very, very average. I'm very average in terms of height, in terms of build, in terms of everything else. My maintenance calories, I am quite active and I do have quite a lot of muscle mass. My maintenance calories are a bit higher than average, but they're around 2,100, 2,200 most of the time. For me, if I eat 1,200 calories, that's 1,000 calorie deficit. And it's almost it's almost a 50% deficit. It's enormous. And I will be absolutely starving on that amount. So the average woman will not benefit from eating 1,200 calories a day. It's far too low and it won't be sustainable. She'll be starving hungry. But if you're 5'2" and your maintenance calories are 1,700, 1,200 might be a very, very, very reasonable amount for you to be eating. You probably won't be hungry on that amount. It's only a 500 calorie deficit. And it probably won't be that hard for you to maintain. Now, you might have some higher days like 1,400, 1,500, but now you're starting to get close to your maintenance calories. So it's not really going to be much higher than that. So while, this message of like, don't eat less than 1,200 calories a day, it's not good for you, it's a starvation diet, while that is absolutely true on the population level for the average woman, it is not necessarily true for you if you are a smaller woman. And I think hearing that message makes you feel like, okay, well, I have to eat more than 1,200 calories a day. This isn't going to be good for me. And that makes it harder for you to lose weight because of that sort of messaging. So all of these kind of factors, then when you pull them all together, comparing yourself to other people, living with a man, I think this is something that all women struggle with, that their husbands actually need more food than they do on average. But for you, that might be an even bigger difference, and you're eating a lot of meals together. Needing less food than the average people around you, getting less bang for your buck in terms of calorie burn from your movement and from your exercise. These are all things that can feel very, very unfair. And when you add all of these things together, and the messaging about not eating 1,200 calories and feeling like you need to eat more than that in order to lose weight, all of these things kind of add up and make it very, very, very hard to actually lose weight when you are a smaller woman. So let's talk briefly about solutions, how you can solve this problem. First of all, you need to just be eating fewer calories every day. And that is just like the not pretty truth of this. But you really need to get a good idea of what your maintenance calories are, a really truthful idea of what your maintenance calories are, because they could be as low as 1,500. If you're not active and you don't have much muscle mass and you're not doing any particular exercise, especially not muscle building exercise, your calories really could be as low, your maintenance calories could be as low as 1,500. And it's very, very, very easy to overestimate it and think, it can't be that. And so I've done it as a coach. I've sort of gone, their maintenance calories can't be that low. So I've given them a higher target. That's a mistake that I've made as a coach several times. You need to be really, really, really honest about how much movement you're doing and how many calories you really need just to maintain your weight. So the first solution is just having a lower calorie target. So figuring out the right maintenance calories for you, being really honest about that, and then subtracting at least 20% from that, not at least 20%, around 20% from that. That's probably going to be a good amount of food for you to lose weight and also not be hungry. Within that lower calorie budget, the things that I say more generically to people, like making sure you're eating filling foods, not foods that are calorie dense, to make sure you get as much volume as possible for your very low calorie target. It's going to be really, really, really important. Number 2, taking into account when you are eating with other people, try to think, at least for a period of time, about how much bigger than you they are. So again, if you weigh 50 kilos or 55 kilos and you're eating with a woman who weighs 65 kilos, like she's quite a bit bigger than you are. And if you're eating with a man who's 85 kilos, he's a lot bigger than you are. He's like another third your size again. So that should be reflected in your portion sizes. If he's, a third bigger than you are, then your meal should be 2/3 of what his is, or like, 3/4 of what his is. The third thing you can do is increase your activity. Again, these things compound. So if you're a smaller woman and you're only doing 3,000 steps a day, it's so hard to get your calories low enough to be able to lose weight. I've seen this happen time and time again. And bringing your steps up to at least 7,000 steps a day, just getting that basic movement in every day, is going to make such a massive difference. Obviously that can be really difficult with desk jobs and things like that. There are some great modern solutions, like having a walking pad that you could use for an hour or two every day. That can make a massive difference to your overall calorie burn. Or a standing desk, things like that, trying to get small walks in, trying to get more activity in your free time. And finally, building muscle. This is a very sort of like slow burner, because it's not going to happen overnight. But if you do dedicate yourself, if you're not doing any activity at the moment or any exercise at the moment, and you start to dedicate yourself to 2 really good strength sessions every week, you'll start to build muscle mass, and that will increase your basal metabolic rate. Not by huge amounts, it has to be said, but it does make a difference. And when you add up all these different things, by increasing your basic metabolic rate, increasing your activity levels, decreasing your food consumption and calorie consumption, these things all add up to they're much greater than the sum of their parts. They're much more impactful when you do all of those things rather than just one of them. So I hope you found that helpful. I find that a lot of smaller women don't think about these things, but when I say it, they're like, wow, that's really, really obvious actually. So let me know if you found this helpful. Let me know if you have any questions, and let me know if implementing any of these strategies works for you and you actually manage to lose some weight.